pleasure of curating and producing events and projects and crazy stuff around the city. And there are a handful of people, small handful of people that I call upon when it comes an opportunity to do something really special. And one of those people is right here. My dear friend Sandra Lillian Velasquez, and also Sean Dixon and Jordan, new friend. So please give a warm, warm welcome for SLV.
Thank you, Brian. Happy Saturday. I want to be gracious, I want to be kind. I want to take a high so that I can fly. I want to be gracious, I want to be kind. I want to take a high so that I can fly. My mind is blown, it's a feeling of disbelief in what I'm hearing, read and see, and it's not always believing. Over and over and over on repeat, no need to rewind. It's an altered reality in real time. You can say it this way today, a different way tomorrow, just to try to fuck with my everybody wants it, not everybody has it. It's like Queen Latifah said back in '93. UNIT, one as a unity. I wanna be gracious, I wanna be good. I wanna take the highs so that I can find. But the things you said and done, drop every good thing that my mama taught me. I wanna be gracious, I wanna be kind. I wanna take the highs so that I can find. But the things you said and done, drop every good thing that my mama taught me. Tune out, just turn yourself all the way up. This is for my mother, this is for my daughter. Do it how you want, just show up for one another. These plans to shut me on the left-hand side. I need to make a sign, I need to move it high. There's some things that have got to stop. Nobody grabbing nobody on my walk. Let's make a shield with the music. Free speech is it and I intend to use it. I've learned my lesson, to pay attention forever. I wanna be gracious, I wanna be kind. I wanna take the heart so that I can find. But the things you said and done, drop every good thing that my mama taught me. I wanna be gracious, I wanna be kind. I wanna take the heart so that I can find. But the things you said and done, drop every good thing that my mama taught me. Thank you. That missing piece of your mind. You cannot find that missing piece of your mind. You cannot find that missing piece of your mind. You cannot find that missing piece of your mind. Tell me once again, how did it all start? I'll try to listen carefully, hear between the words, clear the air between. Magic tricks, conjure your own spell. I wanna take you to the top. I wanna get you out so you can breathe. Just breathe. I wanna take you to the top. I wanna get you out so you can breathe. With me, just breathe. Just breathe with me. Just you cannot find that missing piece of your life. You cannot find your mind. I want to take you to the top. I want to get you out so you can breathe. Just breathe. The music goes quick in real life.
I know.
give another warm round of applause to SLV for their musical performance and starting us off strong this afternoon. They will be back at the end of the panel for a couple more songs, so please do stick around. My name is Prerna Reddy, and I'm the Director of Public Programs here at the Queens Museum, and I want to thank you for spending your Saturday afternoon here, and we're just going to transition into our panel discussion while I talk. Today we're here to be part of answering the question, what will be different, and how do artists, activists participate in and respond to the changing political climate of this country. As an institution, the Queens Museum has been actively trying to support artists, activists in that endeavor in several ways. One, by being a physical space for convening, scheming, learning from each other, and experimenting with ways for artists and cultural producers to bring their unique talents and perspectives to the work of social justice. Two, by asking ourselves what it would mean to be accountable to our local communities here in Queens, particularly in the neighborhoods adjoining the museum, many of which are primarily new immigrant communities, or as we prefer to say, new New Yorker communities, that have challenges such as learning English and dealing with immigration policy change. A lot of folks come from mixed status families, and we have to think about how we are supporting those folks. So for example, we have a New New Yorkers program in collaboration with the Queensborough Public Library that teaches multi-session classes in art and technology in different languages. We also have an off-site community center for arts and activism that primarily functions in Spanish at, near the 111th Street stop right on Roosevelt Avenue. And we have two full-time community organizers who work in my department to really work alongside community partners, other nonprofit organizations. And third, by trying to facilitate the involvement of folks whose voices aren't generally heard in the areas of community development, public space, through training in community design, providing interpretation and childcare, to include the broadest community members in civic and planning processes, and to strive to make our space comfortable and accessible for those with different abilities. So those are just starts. We understand that we have a lot to learn and a lot of ways we need to push ourselves harder as an arts and cultural institution to address the pressing needs of this country and this globe. So I really look forward to learning from and thinking with our distinguished panelists today. And these fabulous folks have been brought together by our curator, Brian T., who will introduce them to you momentarily. But before that, I'd like to thank Brian for his vision and his hard work in organizing 3 discussions on this theme in 3 days, in 3 different venues. And he himself is an artist, a musician, and a cultural creator. He is a singer and songwriter of the band Shrine for Black Madonna, and he's also the president of the Consulting from the Teak Group. And he's also been supporting artists at Creative Capital's Advisory Services program. But most importantly, today he is a convener and has been able to put together these incredible creative minds in ways that will push all of our collective thinking forward today. So please welcome Brian Tate.
Thank you, Prerna. I was going to tell you, you could just keep going there. That was sounding pretty good. How's everybody doing? You guys are doing well? I want to tell you that, so as Prerna mentioned, today is the final day of a 3-day series that we've done called We Are the People We've Been Waiting For, a festival of visionary ideas, activism, and arts. And last night, we were at the 8th Floor Gallery, the Rubin Foundation's 8th Floor Gallery, with a conversation with on what will be different for social justice arts organizations. And the night before, we were at New York Live Arts for a conversation on what will be different for arts funding in a changing America. And these conversations are part of a longer running series, longer running as in, I guess about 6 or 7 months, called What Will Be Different? Conversations on a Changing America. And we started back in December with a discussion around what will be different for women's lives in a changing America. And then in January was what will be different for Muslim Americans, and we followed that up with what will be different for black activism, what will be different for religious activism, what will be different for environmental justice, what will be different for women who are incarcerated, and what will be different for LGBTQ activism. Then we took a short breather and started planning this current series. And you know, when we put together the things in February around black activism, religious activism, and environmental activism, it seemed to me that it could be a good opportunity to package those three talks as a festival. And they included performance and what have you. And I titled the festival, Tomorrow Will Still Be Ours. And this was back in February. This was right after the inauguration. And you know, that's a sentiment in which I deeply believe, as is the sentiment that we're gathered under today. We are the people we've been waiting for. And you know, I spoke to my dad. My mom and dad were very, very active in the civil rights movement in the 60s, and Pan-Africanism and black nationalism. And I spoke to my dad after the election. And I said, Pop, what on earth are we supposed to do with this? And he said, oh, we've been given a tremendous opportunity. He was completely up. And he helped me, and he kind of, and I was like, well, break that down for me. And he broke it down in terms of just the disruption that had happened, had disrupted everything. And it creates an opportunity for us, as people who care about each other, as people who care about the earth, as people who care about life, to step into this new breach and do something that perhaps we hadn't done in a while, which is come together and listen to each other and work together to create the change and create the future that we want to see. And that spirit has very much informed these conversations and has informed what we've been doing these last 3 days. I want to say a thank you to the presenters who have made this possible, and not simply by contributing dollars to the festival costs, although that certainly is appreciated, but also by contributing their ideas and their energy and their thinking and expertise. And that would be Jamie Bennett at Art Place America, Susie Del Val at Creative Capital, Lauren Ruffin at Fractured Atlas, Dina Haggad at United States Artists, and Dr. Marta Moreno Vega at the Caribbean Cultural Center African Diasporic Institute. Those 5 people have been my collaborators in figuring out just what on earth we're actually doing here and convening this. And also, our venue partners have been critical co-organizers of this entire effort. And that includes the folks at Live Arts, the folks at the 8th floor, and not least, Verena and Laura here at the Queens Museum. Would not be possible without their involvement. So today's panel on artist activists. I've had the benefit of knowing and knowing right now some really incredible artists and some really incredible activists. And it's when those two things, those two worlds come together in the work and in the lives of a handful of people, it's such a powerful experience. So I think what I'll do now is simply introduce the panel. Bill, we're ready to do that? Okay. I'm gonna read your names and ask you to come up as we do that. And I think everyone has a bio sheet, so I won't read the entire bios, I'll just read a short bit of everyone's bio. Shahana Hanif is a Brooklyn-born Bangladeshi performance artist, storyteller, disability justice activist, and community organizer rooted in immigrant rights and representation, affordable housing, and language access. She spearheaded CAAV, organizing Asian communities' public housing organizing program, through which she builds the grassroots community power of low-income immigrant Bangladeshi, Korean, and Chinese tenants. Please welcome Shahana Hanif. Composer, pianist, Samora Penderhughes I want to interject for just a second before I call some more up here. The people who are on this panel, who I know personally, are among my dearest friends. Many of the people I don't know, and I find through the research and the things that I've read. I mean, you know, Shahana and I met on Facebook months ago when she wasn't even in the country. And the things that I read about these folks is just like, oh my goodness. And then to have the opportunity to actually meet them, so that applies to Samora. Composer pianist Samora Pinderhughes is known for big multidisciplinary projects and his use of music to examine social political issues. He has performed in Carnegie Hall, MoMA, the White House, and elsewhere, and toured abroad with Branford Marsalis and others. He is creator-composer of the Transformation Suite, a 5-part tone poem arranged over big band jazz to provide an emotional engine to push forward the mission of Black Lives Matter. Please welcome Samora Pinderhughes. As founder, guitarist, of Living Color, and a co-founder of the Black Rock Coalition. I'm looking for Vernon. Where is it? Don't introduce Vernon now. Okay. Well, okay. I will introduce Alice. Wait, Vernon is okay. Yes, there we are. As founder guitarist of Living Color, is my brother, and a co-founder of the Black Rock Coalition. Vernon Reid has done a great deal to undermine stereotypical expectations of what music Black artists ought to play. His rampant eclecticism encompasses everything from hard rock and punk to funk, R&B, and avant-garde jazz, and his anarchic, lightning-fast solos have become a hallmark. His activism work includes founding Healing Hands, a performance series that has brought together all-star percussionists to raise money for civilian victims of war. Please welcome Vernon Reid. New friend, Alice Shepherd is a British-born disabled choreographer and dancer of color. Her artistic practice emerges from her academic career and her training in dance. Alice attends to the complex intersections of disability, gender, and race with movement that challenges conventional understandings of disabled and dancing bodies. She is the founder of Kinetic Light, a collective working at the nexus of architecture, dance, design, identity, and technology to show how mobility is fundamental to participation in civic life and to American national identity. Please welcome Alice Shepherd. And our moderator, Lisa Cortez. I'm going to wait to introduce Lisa Cortez. Does that make sense? I'll wait to introduce Lisa Cortez. And before I introduce Lisa, I'll use this as an opportunity to tell you, so I mentioned some about the history and the past programming of the What Will Be Different series. I'll digress from what's about to happen here to tell you about some of the things that are being planned. One is a topic that I've been very passionate about, and I've started doing the research on it. Working title is We Go Where We're Needed. And this would be a 7-part series of public forums around communities that are targeted by the travel ban. So this would be discussions with Libyan Americans, with Syrian Americans, with Iraqi Americans, with Yemeni Americans, etc. You know, now that there's so many, you know, one of the things I think about a lot is that the same way that so many of us are confused or anxious or angry even about what's happening right now in terms of civil rights and civil liberties and the diminishment thereof, that there are also people who are deeply terrified and afraid to leave their homes for fear of being picked up by ICE or fear of being shot down or fear of being, somehow brutalized. And that there's so many opportunities for us to gather together and to learn from and to listen to each other and figure out not simply, what are we doing about right now, but I think most importantly, what is the future that we want to imagine and how do we go about creating that future? And there's something that I said at the conversation with Muslim Americans back in January, that still stays with me, is that when we're told everything has been decided, we know that nothing has been decided, and the future's unwritten. And when we're told, when we learn that any one of us is being threatened, we know that we're all at risk. And we also know that our efforts to organize and gather will be imperfect because we are imperfect. But we are creative and we're compelled, and our allies are vast. That's helps. It's a guiding thought for me with this series. Okay, lastly, to introduce our moderator, Lisa Cortez, executive producer of the Academy Award-winning Precious, based on the novel Push by Sapphire, is a pioneer. Her work with Rush Arts Management, Def Jam Records, and Lee Daniels Entertainment has defined a career distinguished by her commitment to empowering diverse voices in front of and behind the camera. Her productions have received over 70 international awards and nominations, including the Academy Award, the Golden Globe, the Berlinale, Golden Bear, and Sundance Film Festival's Grand Jury Prize, among others. She launched her production company, Cortez Films, in 2012, and the definition of an artist and activist. Please welcome our moderator, Lisa Cortez.
What's up, 718? How y'all doing today? Woo! Woo! Thank you for coming out. Thank you, SLV. And we're going to hear some more from you afterwards. And I would love when we do our Q&A if we can work out if you'd like Sandra, for you to join us also. Because you are living embodiment of what we're going to be talking about today. So I have some opening remarks, but Vernon and I were sitting over here and we were thinking about this beautiful vista and coming here as young kids to the World's Fair. There used to be this phenomena, that had gone on for 100 years. And was really I think, really crafty, branded content. But one of my favorite places at the 1964 World's Fair, or 65, were two places. One was It's a Small World After All, which really, through puppetry, tried to celebrate multicultural world, but with some really troubling stereotype puppets. Those are the worst puppets, because then you have nightmares about them when you eat heavy food late at night. I'm having a flashback. Okay, let's focus. But also the world of tomorrow. I remember I would make my parents bring me back here, and the world of tomorrow was like this Ford or Thunderbird Cadillac. And you would get in there with 3 other people and you would go travel on this elevated platform and you would look down on what the future was going to be. And so I think that there's an interesting dovetail between this iconic globe and the site of the World's Fair. And I think for personally, how it planted this connection of multiculturalism, a desire to find reflections of myself around the world that went beyond what was presented here. So, what is going to be different for artists and activists? Gloria Anzaldúa, who was a scholar of Chicana cultural, feminist, and queer theory, said that nothing happens in the real world unless it happens in the images in our heads. I believe that artists have the ability to create and practice the type of world we are fighting for with our craft. Art is making and creating new dialogues. It makes us reconsider what is happening in our society and world. And this includes the world under the number 45 regime. Art can call for resistance and can be the resistance by asking people to question their wants, their needs, and their purpose for living, thinking, and surviving through these challenging times. The current threats that we are living under are not new ones. I think as marginalized people, we've always learned to live and create and ascend during times of extreme duress. The difference, though, and even the bright side, is that today's resistance feels much more spectacular and mobilized. The resistance takes the forms of protests, marches, and think pieces, but also as art, joy, and creativity. James Baldwin, who's, one of my muses for a long time, said that art has to be a kind of confession. It doesn't mean a true confession in the sense of that dreary magazine. The effort, it seems to me, is if you can examine and face your life and can discover the terms with which you are connected to other lives, and they can discover them too, the terms with which they are connected to other people. So this afternoon, we're going to examine the worlds that these incredible panelists come from, what has influenced their artivism, which is, a word I like because I don't separate the art from the activism. Imagining the world we want to build and exploring how we can chart a path for advancing that vision. This is a little atypical panel in that this is a conversation. At the end of this conversation, we will have Q&A. So, rally around the campfire. So I would like to just throw out to everybody here first is, what came first, the artists or the activists? Don't be shy, y'all.
So do we want to separate the questions?
What's your thing?
For me, I think it's really that I don't know the difference. That part of it is, we tend to think about activism in some ways as working for political change. Sometimes we think about it as like being out on marches, writing letters, or whatever it is. But there's a way in which the moment you experience a piece of art and it just cuts you open in some ways, that's activism, because that's the moment you're changed. And when that happens, that's the moment I want to be in with you. I want to be in that, sharing that moment, being open and being opened. So that's an activist moment right there, because you see the world, feel the world, experience it differently.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. As far as how I came to it, I definitely, I was always playing music since I was little, but my whole family is, they're all community organizers and they're all teachers and no musicians. So I actually was raised in that world a lot more than the music world, in the world of ideas and in the world of action, which I think is the art world as well, but I was introduced to it first in other ways before I came to it through the art. My parents are very important community organizers and activists in the Bay Area. My father works on issues of youth violence and violence, wrote a very important book about issues of race in New York City in the 90s called Race in the Hood. My mother runs a curriculum called Roots of Success, which teaches people who are incarcerated about the green economy and gives them access to green jobs when they leave prison. So that's my world of what I came out of. And then going into music, that always influenced me, that no matter what I was doing musically, that was the expectation for me, was you have to make your community better than how it was before, when you were younger. And you have to make your world better.
For me, I feel that I didn't self-impose these labels onto myself while engaging in the work. So it felt more like other people were understanding my art and my performative aspects as an artist and an activist. But the impetus for my work was paved by my diagnosis of lupus, which is a chronic autoimmune condition, and at the time had really just transformed the way I understand my body, my gender, and being situated and born and raised in a predominantly Bangladeshi Muslim community in the southern tip of Brooklyn called Kensington. And so I feel that history had already set me up to be where I am right now, because the history of Bangladesh is such that there was a big fight for language and language justice, and what set Bangladesh apart as a sovereign state, now called Bangladesh. So the history was already there to sort of uplift me and bring me where I am right now. And then also being raised in Brooklyn and in the Bangladeshi neighborhood. I was a shy femme person growing up, and very quiet, not really rebellious in the ways of, fighting with my parents or leaving home, or the ways I've seen my younger sisters do it. But it was through my craft of writing that I really found a rebel in me, to question and to conspire and to analytically critique of how my surroundings were impacting my body and the bodies of others. And so it situated me in a very political conversation, and I can't ever separate the political organizing from the self.
So thinking about activism and art is one of these funny things, because to me, everything happens in a political context. I mean, entertainment happens in a political context. I mean, and I don't mean that to sound as a heavy thing, but it's kind of a fact. And one of the premier artists, two of the premier artists that introduced me to the idea of art and activism being intertwined are Jimi Hendrix and Sly and the Family Stone. And the reason I say Jimi Hendrix, I was too young to have gone to have seen him. I was really a little kid, but when I was introduced to his music, I was introduced to the Band of Gypsies record, which is New Year's Eve 1970, and it was right on 2nd Avenue. The Fillmore East was right on 2nd Avenue. And the song Machine Gun on that record is, I think, a prime example of where art and politics are fused at a molecular level. And it's actually that particular performance, because Jimi Hendrix had performed Machine Gun a lot. But it was this particular performance, that particular night, where he synthesized the horror of the Vietnam War. And also, there's a line in the song, evil men make me kill you, evil men make you kill me, even though we're only families apart. And at that point, he had made a link with the so-called enemy. And he kind of exploded the idea that the Viet Cong were the enemy. He said, you're just like me. We're being sent out here to do this thing. And in a way, it's not even personal. The other thing was Jimi Hendrix's playing of the Star Spangled Banner at Woodstock. And, Woodstock was actually a disaster. Everything went wrong with Woodstock. And Jimi Hendrix was supposed to play a lot earlier, and everything had gotten delayed, and It was, you know. So he started playing. He was up at sunrise, and people were leaving of the festival. And he had played the Star Spangled Banner, is another song that had been in his repertoire. He actually used to play a bunch of like national themes. But this particular performance, he scored exactly what the country was going through. You know, it was the sound of a country tearing itself apart and trying to find its way. But for me to hear that was, that was a big influence on me. That was a huge influence on me in terms of that as an idea.
So I'd like to build a little bit more on this thing about the historical context of our work. And in particular to look at kind of what was that aha, that trigger moment. For you, it was being a teen who was hospitalized. For you, it was the music. I know for me, it was Mrs. Hall at kindergarten who sent me home crying because I made this picture with all black people. And she was like, why are there other people in it? And I was like, I made a picture of my family. I made a picture of my grandma and the people who were important to me. And I remember my mother saying, well, I'm just going to put my bra on and go down to that school and explain to her that whatever you want to see and create and the mirrors that you want to create are important. So I'd love to hear from you guys about the triggers and also kind of the historical context of what you reference at times in terms of building your practice.
So the aha is tied to my immigration to the US and literally how freeing that was, which is really an odd thing to say, right? Because I was coming from a world where, you know, growing up in the UK, things were not great, but they weren't awful. They were just what they were because I knew them. But what I thought I knew was really what I grew up trained as a classical musician. And I would win competitions as long as you couldn't see me. And but the moment people saw me, I would be diverted off into this world where there was a way in which I couldn't do that. It wasn't an art form that I could participate in or even have a career in. Immigration to the US changed that for me. I hid out in academia, literally. I quit. I mean, at 16, I realized I couldn't win the arts game such as it was. And when I came to the US, I hid out in academia, and I grew.
What corner of academia did you hang out in?
Meaning, like,
what were you doing?
well, I was hanging out in medieval studies, which was an interesting, and yet another thing. I was looking for race in medieval studies, which is a complicated question. Again, same battle, couldn't do that. But what I gained there was the language of activism, freedom to think, a different kind of critical vocabulary. The UK experience was tied to doing it properly. Does that make any sense to you? That it was tied to orienting the system and being in the system and sort of doing it the way that it was supposed to be done. What this education gave me here was the belief to start again, to step outside the system, to look differently, to access that learning, those critical frameworks, and then begin again in my own artistic practice. And so that's where I was able to sort of to get to that moment. And that turnaround was actually by meeting somebody else, having a conversation, like literally an influential conversation that was literally about integrity, artistic integrity, and a conversation about physical integrity, talking to this dancer who had undergone an amputation of his leg. And you know, the question people always asked him was, how can you be a dancer when you're missing a leg? And what he was talking about was not his physical integrity, but his artistic integrity and aesthetic integrity. And Homer Avila was my doorway into thinking about movement, dance, and integrity, and combining that with my academic framework. Fulfilling the dare that he set me, that's what let me be free.
Yeah, for me, it was there was a personal side, and then I was definitely artistic inspiration kind of side as far as figures. The personal side was that I'm mixed race. My father's African American, but I'm light skinned, obviously, and that was a complicated idea growing up to think through for a lot of different reasons. you're in between communities, and your identity is constantly being questioned, and by all sides. And so that's an interesting thing. And it creates this daily interrogation of yourself that you have to do, and you don't really have a choice but to do it. And it can end up being very healthy, because I think everybody needs to interrogate themselves sometimes, but it can also end up destroying you at the same time. And the other part about it was seeing the construct and the reality of that is race. You know, the fact that race is created, but also is real and has real consequences. And the fact that I could see my father being treated differently by certain people in certain structures than myself. But we're family, you know what I mean? So thinking about that, like being 5 or whatever, or being 10, you know, at different stages meant a lot of different things. And then as far as my artistic practice, James Baldwin, that's why I asked you a bunch of questions before we got on the stage about your personal experiences with him. He was my awakening as far as my own personal purpose. And reading this collection that he has called The Cross of Redemption, which was actually put together after his death, but it's a series of essays and speeches that he gave. And there's this essay in there called The Artist's Struggle for Integrity. And it's all about the responsibility of the artist, and it's not necessarily all about what we're talking about from the perspective of politics or activism, but it's from the perspective of the artist's responsibility to tell the truth. To tell the truth. And what that requires of an artist. And that that blew my mind in 20 different directions. What does it mean to tell the truth? What does that really mean? What does that mean to tell the truth on a daily basis? And what does it mean to do it in public?
So, what does it mean for everyone here? And what Baldwin talked about was, what is the cost of the ticket? And what does that mean for you?
That's hard to respond to. Yeah, for sure. The time I was sort of triggered, and I feel like the impetus still keeps coming at me. Like sometimes I feel like maybe this isn't my path, but somehow I keep like gravitating back to the same place in a different way. Like I've grown and I come back to it. But I remember, when I was diagnosed, I was 17 years old, just the summer of senior year at high school, and I was diagnosed with lupus, and it was hard to pronounce. I knew nothing about it. It was the strangest feeling, and then to explain to my parents who are limited English proficient and who are Bangla proficient, it just, like my brain was just colliding. I was like, how do I do this, and who can support me? And then I was also questioning, like, who are other young Muslim, maybe Bangladeshi, maybe Pakistani women who are living in the diaspora, who have a chronic illness, who are hospitalized and have talked about being hospitalized, who have talked about the spectrum of being disabled, or who have talked about the woes of having to use paratransit for commuting, and the difficulties of being hospitalized in this institution, the medical institution that forced me to get even sicker through surgeries, through the medications, blood transfusions, and all these things I've had to take in at 17. There was no, book given to me that said these are the political ideologies that will help you to better understand yourself. Though later on, when I went into undergrad, women's and gender studies was the route for me to understand how patriarchy was working as someone who was now sick at an institutional level, how capitalism was impacting my body, and then having parents who live in a low-income community and having survived the traumas of, living or trying to reach the American dream. So there are just many impetuses that have brought me where I am. And, in the beginning when I started writing my blog, I was very open about I'll never be able to have sex. And to me, that was it's basic. But then later on, when more readers knew about me and I felt like I had an audience, I started to silence a lot of like the sex conversation, because it was like, well, there are several components of me that are working here as someone who was born in Brooklyn, someone who is Bangladeshi identified, someone who's also Muslim, and then getting interrogated by Muslim readers in some way, and then getting interrogated by XYZ readers. So, and I faced that when I had published this piece on a Muslim women's blog site called Love Inshallah, and the piece was called Heavy Moans, Achy Joints, Heavy Moans, and it was an experience with an ex-partner, and I didn't think it was quite graphic, but a lot of people stormed right at me, and I was like, oh my gosh, I can never write about this in this light. So there's always this like constant battle of like, I can't talk about this right now, but I can talk about this right now. And I don't like that. Like, I don't like where I am right now because of like the discomfort I feel, and like in some ways I'm able to be my true self as a writer, but then in other ways, the parts I want to write about can't be fully written about without losing something completely.
I was nodding, just in sort of listening to the complexity of everything that you just said, Johanna. Still taking it in, still processing, but also agreement, familiarity, recognition for some of those experiences. And wanting to ask, you asked us, what is the cost of the ticket? And I want to ask, actually, is there a ticket, right? I mean, a ticket is something that you present, and you are the admitted entry in my world. And somehow I feel like, essentially what I'm doing is picking up the shreds of somebody else's ticket as fast as I can. I can't make a whole ticket. And when I do present a whole ticket, it just kind of like falls apart. I don't think there is a ticket. I think there is only the process of trying to create the ticket. And that itself is where the costs amplify. That's the moment of interrogation of the failure of friends and community and support, and the growth of new friends, community and support, and art and work. But I wish there were. I wish I could find or even create the ticket. I just don't know how.
So there's always a question of identity, and the question of identity is in the context of narrative. Like, everybody here is part of an ongoing story. And the ongoing story starts as you, there's your family, your friends, your crew, whatever associations you have, your block, your city, your nation. And to the degree that you comfortably fit into all of those things, you're fine. You're cool with what it is. There is no problem. If you start to question, you can start with the family. The family is the first house of mystery and secrets. Seriously. We put it on other people. We look at other people and make judgments about what other people are doing. You don't have to go too far to find the funk if you care to look. Mainly, you don't care to look. So we look at other people and say, yo, blah, blah, blah. See how they do, how they dress, what they drive, what they have. We live in a consumer society where we judge each other about what we have and what we don't have. That's degrees, that's stuff, your salary, the house, all of that. You buy into it, you're good. Oh, there is a ticket, always. Particularly in the American context. I was born in London, I don't know London. I can't do an English accent, I don't know it. I grew up in Brooklyn, right? My parents are from the Caribbean. I didn't go to the Caribbean till I was an adult. So I was a tourist. I went to Africa, I wanted to kiss the ground. I was a tourist. When I went to London, I was a tourist. Brooklyn is how I grew up, but of course, I was raised in a Caribbean household. My parents were very cool. I was very fortunate because, a lot of Caribbean households are very xenophobic. Like, a lot of ethnic households are very xenophobic. Like, a lot of specific, spiritually identified households are very xenophobic. There's what we do and there's the outside. If you don't struggle against it, you don't have a problem. You just go with the flow. But every story at one time was somebody's idea, was somebody's brand new idea. Somebody stood up and said, we're gonna do this. We're gonna not eat that. We're gonna dress like this, and we're gonna do that from here on out. You can accept that, or why do we accept it? Why do we accept it? You know why racism and all the other isms are so pernicious? Because people buy into it. You know, they know that for a fact that, an example, like African American kids versus Caucasian kids, and we're not the only people we're not the only pieces on the board. We act like we're the only pieces on the board. But statistically, they know that black kids for the same infractions are gonna go to detention versus their white counterparts. They're gonna go, if the two criminals are in front of the judge, they did the same shit. The white criminal is gonna get a different sentence than the black criminal. And this is not conspiratorial, this is official statistics. So how is it that it can't be changed in the school systems? They know that black kids are being sent to detention more than the white kids. Why does it keep going on? The individual teachers are nice. The individual teachers are not Klansmen, Klanswomen, but yet still, one kid's gonna go to detention and one kid's gonna get a timeout. I mean, so part of it is facing the daily absurdity of you know, and it can get very frustrating. Like sexism. Like when you're around a bunch of dudes, if you're around your male friends, I'm just speaking specifically to the dudes here, right? How many of y'all said, yo, that's some sexist shit? Why'd you say that? How many of us just let it go? The locker room talk, whatever. I'm gonna say, yo, man, what's that? Why you say she can't drive because she's a woman? What's that? It goes on because we let it go on. I'm sorry.
No. Don't drop the mic. Well, because, you know, it's funny, when I was learning about the panelists and looking at all of your journeys, one of the things that is very interesting is language and the intersection that you all have, but from different disciplines. So what you're talking about, Vernon, is the language of sexism that, you know, we live in a place where it's, you know, seems to be okay to talk about grabbing women's genitalia, or in meeting the wife of the president of France to say, oh, she's in really good shape, you know, and that occurred less than 24 hours ago. So I would like to build upon what you've been talking about with everyone about language and your practice and your critiques of how language can be a barrier, and particularly as it affects your artistic integrity. I'm going to start with you, Smart, because I know we talked a bit about language, and I loved your perspective, particularly being in this space, you know, a museum and all the boundaries that can come too many when it comes to the arts.
Before I say that, I want to respond to one thing that he said, which was profound to me, as far as, you know, the personal being connected to these larger ideas and about the family and things like that and those type of truths. Because when I'm talking about the truth, what I learned from James Baldwin, why he was so important to me, is that a lot of times when we have these conversations about these national issues and about structural issues and things like that, and we talk about why people vote against their interests, or why Trump won, or why different things happened, we never acknowledge the connection between the lies that people are telling themselves personally and how that allows for certain narratives to succeed. So for instance, what I mean is the great lie of the American dream, and this is connected to language and how powerful it is. The language of the American dream and connected with the imagery that is the narrative of the American dream. That works because people are struggling and they need to tell themselves a very personal lie about what their life can look like in the future and what their life is in the present because they're not happy with what it is. And it's very important for us to acknowledge what that is in order to understand why people have certain ideas around buying into the American dream, around believing an idea like Trump and believing a lot of people saying, you know, I want to vote for a rich person because I think I'm going to be rich one day. And then you're taking their health care away. It's like we're thinking about why will they buy into this okie doke? It's literally because they believe that lie because they feel like they have to believe it. It's an unconscious idea. And we have to really look at that and how to change that. That has to be part of our solution. Instead of, because especially when people talk about conversation, oh, we have to have dialogue, That doesn't work because we're just talking at each other. It's not
So you're saying we need to change what is aspirational, yeah? Is that?
Well, first we have to change the language of what the American dream is and the idea of it. We have to destroy that idea because it never existed. We also have to, create, the most dangerous person in the Black Panther Party, the first person that got murdered was Fred Hampton. Reason that happened was because he was in Chicago, I think it was Chicago, or Detroit, I can't remember which of the cities. He was organizing poor people across race. And he was this very compelling figure that was able to be very pro-Black and able to say, these are Black issues, this is important from our perspective, but he was also able to say, we are all poor, we all have no health care, we all have no rights, we all have no education, and this is what we need to do together. And that was why he was the most dangerous person. You know, Martin Luther King was at his most dangerous not when he was doing Selma, but when he was organizing the workers. You know, when he was talking about poor people's boycotts, then they was like, we can't have this, he's gotta go. So that's a thing that we really need to look at.
Can I take up your great American dream for a moment and talk about how that sort of ties in with my artistic practice for a second? You know, mobility. It depends on the notion of mobility, figurative mobility. The idea is you come here, you know, and you do one thing, and the next generation does the next thing. Upward mobility is the way. So how much of that depends on actual, literal, physical mobility, like literal, fleshly, physical mobility? How does that much depend on infrastructural mobility? And you're just thinking about access in a very real way. If you can get into your polling booth, if you can vote because it's in your language, or it's been, the digital computer system's been made accessible to you. If you can to get here, right? I thought it would take the 7 train. Well, I looked the 7 train up, and the 7 train is accessible only on game days. Like what? Right? So, literal, the notion of mobility as a sort of metaphor for American life is dependent on some kind of understanding and participation in civic life is dependent on physical mobility, infrastructural mobility, which is also connected to cultural mobility, to language mobility, to healthcare mobility. The notion of mobility is just embedded in all of these big systems, and we don't actually think about it pulling it out. It's just something that is aspirational, desired. And as a dancer, I think about movement literally, really, really deeply, literally, fleshly, from the finger to the toe to the chair. But I also think about what it means.
For me, language is everything. I mean, I have the privilege of being able to speak and read and write in proficient English. But during my organizing work at CAV, Organizing Asian Communities, and as a tenant organizer at Queensbridge, at the Queensbridge Project, I was working with Asian ethnic groups, the Chinese, Korean, and Bangladeshis, but particularly focusing on working with the Bangladeshis. And speaking in Bangla was an absolute, responsibility. Having to speak in the language that the folks you are working with, so that they understand what's going on, what's not being given to them, and how to then organize with this specific language. And our biggest campaign was around language access to ensure that the public housing landlord, NYCHA, the New York City Housing Authority, would be providing improved language access services throughout the projects and their growing Asian American population. But I saw so many gaps in that because as a first-gen Bangladeshi, at home I was, the Bangla was enforced. We had to speak and respond in Bangla, and all three sisters, we can speak Bangla quite fluently, and but that came with having this community of other Bangladeshis where we were really, like everyone around us, everyone from landlords, contractors, shop owners, boutiques, everyone is Bangladeshi speaking in Bangla. So it was obvious for me to know Bangla, except when I got into this field of organizing, I didn't have the reading and writing capacity and had always had to leave it up to a translation service to do kind of the bulk of the analysis that I was trying to figure out in English. But there's so many things that get lost in translation. And when I'm trying to explain or talk about power and patriarchy, taken from a Western context when the people I've been working with have migrated and know what organizing is, but there's different translations of it. And so I didn't want to rely on Western context of what is political organizing. I needed to really deep and dive into the historical elements of the organizing examples that have come from, let's say, the liberation movement and liberation war in Bangladesh or within South Asia. Who are the feminists that some of these women can relate to around education and access to healthcare and affordable homes? So this is what my question was as a Bangladeshi organizer who was now just specifically working with Bangladeshis. So then eventually, because of these gaps, I transitioned out of this position and traveled to Bangladesh for 7 months, where I dived in and was working with feminists across different fields, but I really wanted to question feminism in a context of ultra-surveillance happening in Bangladesh and the global south in general, in very parallel ways that are happening in here with black women, with brown women, Latinas, etc., and queer people, trans people. And so I wanted to see how our works could be, bridged together or not, or what are strategies that they're sort of building that can be implemented here in different ways. How can we build a bridge and have some transnational analysis to sort of work together in fighting back and dismantling these systems that are prohibiting us from speaking up and speaking against these oppressive systems. And so now I'm back and really want to emphasize Bangla so that I've just joined the local city council member's office, Brad Lander, who represents my district, just to work with Bangladeshi constituents, and was just tabling at an event, and some of the Bangladeshi folks had no idea what a council member was. And so these there's the basic political stuff, like what an elected official does is, even though he's been there for the last 8 years, these are things that I feel like if your constituency represents Bangladeshis or your district is trying to build with Bangladeshis, why aren't the basics already out there? Who are you and what are you doing? And then comes the other stuff where it's addressing how to talk about race, how to address Islamophobia and fight back. And so for me, it's a moment of using language and having picked up on the reading and writing skills a little, and collectively bring others together to build some strategy that is innovative, and that requires the writing, that requires the visual components, the art and the music, because we really do need the cultural organizing and the political organizing, and these deep conversations to kind of be yeah, we're ready,
How do we bridge the divides? So we're talking about your family and okay, as long as everybody else is Caribbean, and how do we get beyond the xenophobia that exists out there it for this future that we're looking for?
I think we have to give up. I think we have to give up the pleasures of demonization, because it feels so good to demonize the other. It's great. It works. And what's more uncomfortable, and this is something that Baldwin talked about all the time, is to see each other as human beings with all of our flaws, our potential for greatness, you know, our potential for cowardice, and that we all have it. And I think there's a certain kind of heroic narrative of the activist that we have to let go of. You know, like you gotta, I mean, I like the Che Guevara t-shirt as much as anyone else. You know, I love it. And Malcolm X standing at the window with the weapon, you know. I think we're gonna have to give some of that up, though. I think we're gonna have to give some of that up. And that's gonna be hard. Because those narratives have given us a shape. I'm comfortable, you know. And a lot of those narratives are very gendered, like, you know, like, I'm gonna go, but I'm taking some of you with me, that sort of thing. You have to give a lot of that up. And we're gonna have to find a way to find common ground or find a common something. Like, I became very uncomfortable with, for example, demonizing Trump voters. They're this, they're that, they're blah, 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 blah. And I started to think to myself, you know, this is exactly why they did what they did. Like, demonizing them is exactly why. Like, this whole thing that we're better than you, we're smarter than you all are corny, y'all are whack. And so they got the corniest, wackest person possible and voted him in as president. I mean, the dude, I mean, but, and quiet as it's kept, you know, it's a lot of, I remember that the band The Time had a song, Donald Trump Black Version. You know, Trump has had a barbershop constituency, whether you like to understand that or not. You know, somebody once said that Trump is a poor person's idea of what a rich person is. And it's, you know, there's something to think about. No, I can't say that. Uh-oh, I know I'm in Queens. What'd I do? Trap dog and open up. Duck and roll. Incoming.
My phone is off. I'm just waiting for my phone to turn on. You have plenty of time. I'll let you know when my phone turns on.
Anyway, you know, I'm on Twitter and a lot, and I have Vurt22, VURT22, and I have a lot of there's a lot of guitar people, and some of the people that follow me are Trump supporters. You know, they'll send hashtag MAGA to me, and I engage. I don't block. You know, I don't call names, but if it's something I don't agree with, I will go in. I won't pull back and not say what I think, but I allow people to have their say, because it's about humanizing people. It's about engaging on some level, even if I disagree. And I think it feels good to, like, you know, and a lot of my people say, why don't you block that guy? And I'm like, no, I'm not gonna block him. I wanna hear what he has to say.
There's a couple, I think I have two different dimensions to that question. And I think one of the most important things to me is thinking about structure versus the individual. As far as, I've thought about this a lot now. I think my primary concern is that people are not dying, you know what I mean? And not being murdered by the police and not being incarcerated. The people who are under attack, those are my priority. And I think if we're gonna solve those issues, we have to know what is the structure and what are the people that are being used to uphold the structure, you know? So my primary concern is not changing individuals' minds. to be honest. My primary concern is changing a structure so that it works better for the people that it's not even changing, it's dismantling the structure and putting a new one in its place. So for me, that's a very different question, you know? Yeah, that's why my last project was called The Transformation Suite, and the reason I used the word transformation instead of a word like change is because to me it was about changing structure, it was about transforming the society and the institutions that make it up. And that, those institutions, they don't actually benefit that many people. They benefit a very small subsection of people, and then there's another section of people that are being used to uphold that, and then there's another group, set of people that are just the victims of those structures, you know what I mean? So when I'm trying to do what I do, a lot of it is about interrogating the ideas of what upholds those structures so that we can actually change them. And that's why I go back to these ideas of the truth, is things like history, when we're talking about history, there are historical narratives that uphold structure and that people buy into that actually leads them to being able to be used to justify the continued use and upholding of that structure. Something like the American Dream, things are different like that. That's an idea, you know what I mean?
So, as we kind of get towards the end of this before we go to Q&A, is how are you all thinking about using your art to disrupt, critique, challenge these narratives, but also to provide solutions to our communities that, not only here, but, our brothers and sisters throughout the diaspora are amazing similarities of the issues that they are facing.
So I keep in my head this 1975 statement of Toni Morrison, and it's just beautiful. I mean, it's just smart. And she says literally, like, the very function of racism is to keep you from doing your work. And, it's like, and then she goes on to say, you will always be in these contexts where you have to prove yourself. They say you have no language, so you do this and you prove yourself in language. They say you have no art, you do this and you prove yourself in having art. They say you have no history, and then you prove yourself you have your history. And so the thing about it is to not engage the system in that way directly on its terms. Do your work. And so I hope to be in my spaces with my peoples doing my work on my terms that I have created in conversation with my people, with my community, even with panelists here, hearing you speak. These are the terms that I choose to engage with. These are the terms that I choose to create, to make work with. And then, if my work moves you, great. It is not my job to change your mind. If my work makes visible some kind of systemic oppression, then good. Go and organize, come with me and organize and mobilize with me. Let's go and fight the system together. But also, allow me to make my work. And if my work moves you, great. If you hate it, great. If it doesn't, fine. But let's also keep making and doing our work.
I practice my visions in 3 ways, and so first and foremost, it's being grounded in the community that I grew up in. I don't plan on leaving Kensington. I want to say right now that I want to live there forever so that my presence is felt, and this is the first time for me at least, and I'm 26, that I've seen in Kensington a woman, take on a position in an elected official's office. So that will make me a very visible, tall, brown woman in the community, and they'll probably have to see me every day. This will be different because all my life I've seen men lead the discussions. So for me, I see that it's hard for me to detach from the identity politics while working on the systemic issues that are involved. So I recognize that there's these broader issues that need Bangladeshis to be involved, like immigration issues and affordable housing. These conversations, we need to be in the table. But then there's the interpersonal community issues where we're divided by regions, who's from which region and who's from the other region, and these divisions, and then other divisions based on homeland politics, and who is an Awami League supporter and who is a Jamaati, etc. And these might be unfamiliar, but there's ways in which the diasporic communities take shape, even after migrating from the homeland. And so in this kind of area, I want to really write more about the critiques, about how difficult it is and what are the challenges in organizing diaspora communities. And the third is really working on curriculum and literature that is coming from a feminist perspective, where I'm not relying on a voice that isn't mine to translate materials that I'm creating. So I want to be able to create the materials with collective input that is in the language that folks understand and are most comfortable with and can then build on. I don't want to go in and be like, well, you don't know anything about patriarchy. Well, maybe we haven't had the discussion yet. Maybe there's no literature that really roots the history of the Global South to really initiate these conversations rather than the divisions. So those are my 3 ways.
I just want to get out of my own way and get out of other people's way. And I want to help. And that's pretty much it. That's pretty much it.
What I am thinking about right now, the next project that I'm working on that I'm excited about, is going to be focused on trauma and healing. One of the things that I've learned a lot about from my parents' work is that there's no institution for healing. There's no best practices for healing. There's really not a lot of conversation about it. But we know that there's trauma, and in the communities that I'm a part of, that I'm from, that concern me, that I feel like I want to, be addressing or looking at with my art, they're dealing with danger on a daily basis, dealing with trauma on a daily basis, and if we're going to answer all these other questions, I realized, that if we're going to answer all these other questions, that's one that's very important, and one that I think an artist can tackle, in a certain type of way that maybe others can't. Because, art can illuminate those things that you can't really talk about the right way. Even when I'm talking about it right now, I don't really know what to say about it. But that's one of the reasons that I play music, because if me and Verna, this is one of the greats right here, so I'm trying to be like him, but if we have a conversation and we're just playing, like right now, it would be totally different than us speaking, and probably a lot better. You know what I mean? Like a lot deeper. So that's kind of what I'm trying to look at next as far as my artistic practice, is how can I engage with this issue of healing, with this idea of healing on a deep level artistically.
I think there's one thing I do want to say about the work, and that is there's a very obvious way of thinking about activist or artivism. There's an obvious protest song. It's about a thing, and it's saying you don't like this thing. And I've come to find, listening to different songs, that it can be incredibly effective to embed what you're talking about in something that doesn't seem like it's talking about that. And one of the greatest examples of this to me is, Do You Know the Way to San Jose? When you get a chance, it's like a ditty. It's a song by Dionne Warwick. It's one of the most incisive critiques of capitalism I've ever heard. Go back and I think it's in the second or third verse, you'll hear it. And nobody thinks of it as a protest song. It's the last song you would ever think of as a protest song. I don't know the verse by heart to say. Ventura is a great big freeway. You put 100 down and buy a car. In a week, maybe 2, they'll make you a star. Weeks turn into years, how quick they pass. And all the stars that never were are parking cars and pumping gas. You don't think of that as a protest song at all.
Sorry, can I say one other thing that inspires too, just really fast? Because I think that's brilliant. I also got to look that up. I think one of the issues I have right now too with art, specifically music, is I feel like, not to be a hater, but maybe this isn't sound like a hater. I feel like a lot of times people clothe themselves in the imagery of protests or the imagery of activism or I don't know what the word is, but like revolutionary concepts without actually like really being about it. And then people fall for that in art, you know? People are like, oh, that person is really about this life. And it's like, no, they just like clothe themselves that way, but they're not really doing that on a daily basis. And I just think that I think it's important for my generation specifically to recognize the difference between that, because we fall for that a lot. And there's a difference between that and what that is, or what Marvin Gaye is. So.
Well, you know, I mean, I'm talking about language. I know that this is an institution. I have dropped a few. Excuse me if I've been a bit, but.
Say malarkey.
Malarkey. There's a lot of malarkey and shenanigans going on each and every day. I mean, people are contradictory. People want to be a certain way, and they want to think they're a certain way, and they're not. And how do we get to what's really happening? I mean, that's a life. I mean, I'm still trying to figure that out every day. So I think the thing is to keep going for like doing the work. You know, like doing the work in spite of yourself is kind of the crucial thing. I mean, as much as it's Baldwin, it's also Kafka. It's like one day you wake up and you're a cockroach on your back. I mean, this is fantastic because we can all be in that place. When you make a decision, you decide to change it, you decide to do something, and everyone in your world can say no. Oh no. In every movie you say, be yourself. Are you serious? Be yourself as long as everybody else is cool with it. What if being yourself, I mean, people in the LGBT community know this quite well. What does it mean if you're being yourself, and being yourself is like, your immediate community is not with it? I mean, that's a challenge. I mean, it really calls on us to have a great deal of courage, even in spite of everything else. You decide you want to play the piano, and nobody in your family is a musician, and they don't understand, they don't even like your piano playing. They say, man, you can't play the piano, and you are compelled to do it. That's the thing. What's the difference? You shouldn't be doing that, you know, because you don't fit the frame. That's to keep doing it. When I play, a lot of times, there ain't that many black folks in the audience. And that doesn't bother me. It's not like I don't have an identity crisis about that. That's not really my problem. You know, it doesn't really bother me. What bothers me is that people are told at an early age, you should listen to this, you shouldn't listen to that. One thing that I will credit my parents for is they never told me, ever, this is white music, this is black music, you should listen to this, you shouldn't listen to that. How many people get told that all the time? Get told, you should be into this, you can't be into that. And that's, you know, and part of becoming ourselves is taking on that fight. Not just with the outside world, but inside of our own families. and still loving the people in the family, and still turning around and going, I'm going to do what I'm going to do.
So before I just say a couple words in closing, I want to thank all of you for your time, for your work, for your passion. I want to thank the Queens Museum for presenting such a wonderful welcoming forum, and of course, Bill Tolles, and my personal God of the Day, Brian Tate. Thank you so much. So, in closing, you know, this life as an artivist is, it's a part of the continuum for me. And the art and the work has to be the gravity that never lets up. The future I'm thinking of, I want to see a new World's Fair. Let's do it, Brian. I want to see everybody here. I want to hear Transformation Suite. I want to hear your Aaron Gardner Requiem. I want to see you dance doors. I want to hear about your escapades in the world at the new World's Fair of socially engaged people. I think that would be the dopest event ever.
Get the wheels spinning.
Okay, I saw the light bulb go up. So, you know, when I first saw the title of the series that has been so beautifully curated by Brian, We Are the Ones We've Been Waiting For, I kind of started like my little, geeky moment of going back and seeing who it was attributed to. And, I got everything from, well, it's a June Jordan poem and Sweet Honey in the Rock, put it into a song. And, it's also something that the Hopi people have spoken of. And it's really wonderful to see the resonance of this frame across so many different voices. But I just want to read a little something to finish. It's not the full poem. And this is attributed to an unnamed Hopi elder from Arizona. It says, "The time for the lone wolf is over. Gather yourselves, banish the word struggle from your attitude and your vocabulary. All that we do now must be done in a sacred manner and in celebration, because we are the ones we've been waiting for." Thank you. We now are going to do Q&A. Sandra, I'd love if you would join us, if you would like to. It's a family affair. And do you need a mic out there to pass around?
And thank you also to our moderator, Lisa Cortez. Any questions from the audience? Yes. Please tell us your name, too.
My name is Saria Idan. Thank you all so much for sharing with us here today. My question is about the audience. At what point in your creative process or in putting the work out in the world are you thinking about the audience? Like, is it at the moment of inception of who am I talking to, or is the moment of inception of creative work from a place of being compelled? Or is it in the marketing strategy? Like, who is interested in investing in this, either foundations or people who buy the product? Like, when is it the talking to your immediate community, and when is it talking to the power structures, right? So, your audience.
Wow, that's a big question. So I actually have 3 different bands. One of them is what you saw today, SLV, those are my initials. I also have another band called Pistolera, which is all in Spanish. Pistolera, for those of you that don't speak Spanish, means female gunslinger. And then I have a kid's version of that, if you can believe that or not, called Luna Luna, which is bilingual. And so for those different projects, I actually approach them differently. I'm going to go with an easy answer for now, where you were saying, like, you approach it from the marketing standpoint, or are you talking to the audience when you're conceiving the artwork? So for Luna Luna, I write bilingual music for children, well, for families. So I am thinking about my audience when I'm creating those songs, because I'm obviously going to sing about things that are family friendly, I'm not going to sing about, necessarily racism or immigration, in like a happy daytime, sing-along song. So in that context, I am thinking about my audience ahead of time. But, in the context of Pistoleta or SLV, I'm not creating the work necessarily for the audience. I'm not thinking about marketing or, who's going to identify with this song. I'm going to try to reach these people. I just feel like I need to absorb the world and then create art from that. And then it usually is like this cycle, because then once you perform it, then people respond, and then it kind of feeds your creativity. So that's just how it is for me. I don't know about you guys, the other musicians on the stage.
So some work I make for me, right? Some things are purely for me. At other times I have the idea, and I don't usually think about the audience in the actual conception of the idea, but in the manifestation. I want my work to have stakeholders who aren't me, to have community, and to belong to the people to whom it speaks. And so there's my audience right there. Marketing, I'm afraid I'm not very good at that yet, so I'll get better at thinking about that later. But for the main part, I want to speak to the people who are implicated or interpolated into the work, by which I mean who are called into being by the work itself.
For me, I appreciate, living in a time where digital media and social media has really transformed the way I show up, especially living in a spectrum of disabilities. And so, first and foremost, Facebook was my outlet to sort of inform people and to lead my advocacy in a way in which felt comfortable to me. And it was both for myself and for other readers, friends who couldn't reach me or didn't know which questions to ask to know about how I was doing after coming home from the hospital. So in one way is that, and then also I use Instagram very, very frequently to kind of utilize some of the features that it has to explore my boundaries and to see what pushes my drive, and using the tech and using words and using the features of having now the multiple slideshow feature that helps you sort of curate a story without even being deliberate about it. And that in a way has really helped me reach a mass of Bangladeshi Muslim women, other Muslim women, and just women and queer folks from across and outside of the US that I would have never imagined would be reading my work, or whose work I would be reading in a time like this. I don't have to look for books anymore. There are thinkers and creative people who are just a tab away, and it's beautiful to me.
It always begins with my heart and healing and amplifying my heart to help others. I think if I can't let audience lead, I can only let authenticity of my expression lead.
I think the more specific you are, the more universal you are. I think if you're thinking about writing for someone, it can work or not work, but if you're writing from kind of where you are, and if the song is successful, in the sense of it's a piece of work that you're willing to put out there, you feel good about putting out there, I think it'll reach people. I also do visual art, and it's funny because you mentioned Instagram, and sometimes I'll have an image and I will think about, if I post this, will it be misunderstood? More than I think about that. With music, I don't really care that much about that. But with visual things, I may have an interesting picture, and the picture works for me, but is the picture going to exploit a person, or is it going to generate, is it going to create, because knowing how social media is, how people are just untethered to sense, will it become something that's not cool? So there are times when I do pause before I hit send.
I don't think, I don't really, when I'm creating, think about audience, but I do think about what I think is needed. To me, that's two different things. So I'm not thinking about if I make this thing, who's gonna be in the room, or what's gonna be, you know, what is their reaction gonna be. But I do think about, kind of like that Toni Morrison quote where she's like, I didn't see this, I wanted to read this type of book and I knew I needed it, but it didn't exist, so then I wrote it. So, but from a less individual perspective, like if I'm thinking this thing needs to be out in the world, but I don't see it right now, I'll try to find my way into that. If I have a space. If I don't, then I'll leave it alone and be like, that's somebody else's job. Because you don't have, not everybody can do everything. So you also have to know that. Because that's where cultural appropriation happens a lot, where people will be like, oh, I could do this thing, you know, and then it's like, nah, that's not you, bro. But, yeah, so I think that's for me, like, if there's a thing that I see doesn't exist, or there's a way that I could address it in a very personal way that's not there, then I'll do that thing.
You know, it's funny, like, sometimes, like, you may intend to want to do something, and then something else will happen, right? Like say, Bob Marley and the Wailers. The Wailers were trying to be like like R&B. They were trying to be like Smokey Robinson and the Miracles. And it just turned sideways, and they did something else that was amazing. So sometimes you may want, I'm gonna try to do this, and then it just becomes something else. And just going with the something else that it becomes. Because a lot of times we're control freaks as artists. We want it to be, we want to craft it and have it be the way we want it to be. But sometimes the work has a life of its own. That's another thing too. Like, the work is its own entity, and it will go somewhere else. And that can be a problem for you. That can be a real problem. It's a problem. You know, I want it to be, and it's, and just letting it be, that can be hard.
Yeah, my name is Cassandra. I have a statement and a question. So first and foremost, I use music to soothe me and to heal me of the changes that are taking place, more specifically jazz. So I'm very familiar with your sister, Elena. I've seen her many times. So in November 8th, I was so upset over, the election and everything else. And what I did is I just leveraged the music that was out there, specifically jazz musicians, because they give so much of themselves with that. And I just came from the Montreal Jazz Festival where I listened to, where I saw Kendrick Scott, and he actually had a piece on Philando, and the whole audience was moved. So to me, I feel that you as artists sometimes unconsciously become activists without even knowing it. Having said that, you mentioned something, Samora, that we have to be careful on who we look to as, I guess, sending the message, because some people can clothe themselves into that. And I want to know your opinion about, first and foremost, 49ers, Colin Kaepernick. Because to me, I have a lot of respect for him, but now you got me thinking.
No, he's not one of those people.
Okay.
So that's a perfect example.
Yeah.
Was that your question? If he's one.
Well, yeah, but also, is it bad for people to clothe themselves in that if the message is going across anyway, right? So, if that's
a great question. So I guess two answers. So as far as Kaepernick, that's a perfect example, and that's a great clarification I should make, that there is the difference for me in those two things is are you doing the work? And I'll tell you, I'm from the Bay, so I don't know Colin, but I have a lot of colleagues who work with Colin, and that was only the first step for him, but it became just the only thing because the narrative of it turned into that, which is a perfect example of language and iconography being everything, because it became this whole thing about the idea of the American, national anthem and kneeling, when that was not the point of it for him at all, as how I understand it actually. That was just the only thing he could do that would draw attention to what was important to him. It was not about the anthem. It was about, this is a grand statement I can make that I know people will see that will allow me to speak on a number of issues around police brutality and incarceration. And then what he did was he created this campaign called Know Your Rights Campaign, where he goes to cities throughout the country and he works with youth on basically, number one, it's built around the idea of know your rights around policing, and these are the rights you have with police and stops and all this stuff. And he teaches these kids, but then he also brings in local activists wherever he is, talks to them about art, talks to them about the power they have, what they can create, their rights. It's amazing. It's one of the best programs that exists right now. And he completely funds it himself, and he's at every stop. So that is not that at all. He is like all about the work. And that's why he's been blacklisted from the NFL. Let's be honest about it, but people don't want to say that. And then the other part of the question, is it, if people are doing that, is it wrong if it means something to people? That's a great point. I agree with you. I think if something resonates with somebody on a positive level, then that's all that I could never say that was not enough.
Anyone else want to respond to that?
Could I just have a follow-up? In regards to Colin, how do you feel about the fact that he said that he did not vote, right? So I just feel kind of confused about it, because I know so many people, so many of us, so many Americans have died for that right to vote, and there are people right now that are being denied that. So I felt very confused about how to feel about him not voting, understanding the choices, but also he has to understand that the right is a privilege, right?
Yeah. So to me, and I'm sure you guys have your different opinions on this, but to me, being from the Bay, again, I have two kind of different ideas on that. I definitely think that voting is important, but I always think that it's framed in the wrong way. We're always, this is my opinion as people of color, we're always told to vote, but we're never told to put people in places where we can elect them. You know what I mean? Like, we're only told about the last step. We're only told, oh, it's time to vote, let's go vote. But there's very few conversations, there's local conversations, but not big conversations, about how do we find a person who will actually hold our interests so we'll want to vote for them. We're always in a position to vote for people that basically just use us. You know what I mean? Let's be honest about it. And so the conversation we need to start having, and it is being had, I'm not saying it's not, but it needs to turn from this kind of guilt, like, oh, folks aren't turning out or whatever, or you need to vote, to how do we build on our capital, our political capital and our community power to actually put in office our own people? Like, and I'm not even talking about president. I'm talking about state boards. I'm talking about the education people. I'm talking about what she's doing. I'm talking about this. That's what it is. You know what I mean? We need that. This is the most important thing of all. You know, it's like, who is our local whatever? And before even just getting to the point of, oh, we get to vote for them, how are we going to put somebody on the ballot that then we can support? So I think that's the important part about it. And I think he became kind of a boogeyman for this idea, which again was a fallacy, which a lot of people wanted to put the election of Trump on black and brown voters, but black and brown women, like, it was white women that when you look at the numbers, voted for Trump in ways that swung the election. It was not black and brown people. And that happens a lot, that we get blamed for the stuff that hurts us. The other part about it is just, I think that, well, that's all I say. I don't want to take up too much time. That's the most important part of it.
You know, this conversation is very complex for me because when I was just doing community organizing, I was very anti-elected official. Like, I was just like, the government's not going to help us, we got to help ourselves. And then, I mean, I grew a little, I guess, for taking on the position at Brad Lander's office because I'm just like, wait a minute, like, no one in his staff looks like me, speaks Bangla, they have to always outsource, and it's always no funding for things and resources that marginalized groups require. Why are the most basic things not available, and then you expect us to vote? So it's very complex, and I am disappointed, you know, when I hear that friends have not voted in this past election, because I'm just like, well, we're in the ICU right now. We're in a very critical condition because healthcare, affordable housing, women's rights, with Planned Parenthood almost getting defunded. Like, these are critical things we need to have conversations about in the immediate, not when the next election cycle comes up, or not when the next, the city council members will be racking in votes. So civic engagement is so important in ensuring that people who look like us, talk our languages, are from the diaspora, were raised here or whatever city, is being involved, and there are mentors that are pushing us to reach those standards, because I feel like in the community, I was never invited to the table when men were having these conversations about their associations, and by men I mean the Bangladeshi men I was raised with. And so at one point I just had to like sit myself at the table, and this was, I'm talking about a specific incident. Last year, an imam who's a religious scholar and leads the Muslim prayer and his assistant were killed in broad daylight, coming out of their Ozone Park mosque. And so that was the time when, in Kensington, where I live, all of the mosque leaders had sort of come together and decided on a town hall, and like, now we have to address Islamophobia. Despite there being so many black men killed and et cetera, but the gun violence and like all of this like police questioning stuff finally came up in our community. And yet, it was all men organized, men produced, completely disregarding the fact that women are also impacted by Islamophobia and the larger systems of oppression. And I literally just heard about this planning meeting and just showed up. And so, one, we need to have each other's backs, like we need to like let each other know what's happening. And then two, be ready for these conversations. No one will prepare us for them. And it's a hard place to be, because on one hand, I understand when people say I didn't vote, and then two, I want to know why you did vote. So there's just a multifaceted thing happening, and maybe I'll never come to a consensus with it or like feel good about it. But it's important that we are talking and we're sharing the news rather than just keeping it to ourselves. Even if you take on a facet of an activist, like you better show up. Because, for me, I do call friends out who are like, I'm an activist, but then don't show up to like critical actions and stuff, or aren't funding. If they have money, ask them for the money. Like, we can't now look for money to be outsourced from other groups who might get defunded. Who are our funders in our community? They're wealthy-ass immigrants. Like, there's just a lot of things that are happening right now that can be really outsourced from within our community in a very collective way.
I think I'm very ambivalent about people that say they don't vote. I mean, I get it, but I vote all the time. So, voting is my license to complain.
We have another question, but I wanted to ask Alice in terms of the mobility that you spoke about. I just wanted to get your sense of voting in elected office and so forth. And when we talk about activism, I think that often the definition is, it's kind of in the context of street activism, but in terms of another form of political activism being actual, elected office. Just what your thoughts were about that.
So I'm following on Twitter a number of hashtags, hashtag CryptoVote UK, which is really working, both of those hashtags are working out disability angles on, in very public forums, healthcare, transportation, looking for elected officials who understand disability in various kinds of ways, not just, yes, understand the ADA or the DEA in the UK, but really understand how those intersecting other legislations intersect with that. And they're really thinking about, organizing, mobilizing, and again, there's that word, to get people to polling stations, to raise awareness among disability communities. So, I mean, the CryptoVote world is a difficult and tricky conversation that you can't just into. But it is one that I think we do need to pay attention to, because it goes across so many different intersecting systems. And it's not just about language access. It's not just about technology access. It's not just about voting booth access. It's about how do we organize in ways that don't necessarily, in that thing, it's like one real strong activist thread is, well, if you're going to walk down Fifth Avenue, is that going to be possible for a disabled person? Like, how do we imagine our bodies and minds in activist spaces with reference to disability, which is not just about wheelchair access? So it's that constant navigation of embodiment and alignment in the face of these political systems.
My name is Mel Lehman. I'm with an organization called Common Humanity. And basically what we try to do is to share art from Muslim and Arab refugee artists. And we have exhibits throughout the country, several dozen of Iraqi refugee artists. And we're just about on the edge of getting Syrian refugee artists. We take them to churches and people, other public areas. People are very receptive. And they say, yes, the images that we see of Arab and Muslim people on the media really isn't complete, and they're so glad to see this other art. So I would leave you with a question and as a challenge, how you as public figures could use your public forums to help Americans see the beauty and the goodness of people overseas. What we're up against is a media which is so intent upon showing the negative parts of people in the third world. And we very seldom see the beauty of the people in the third world. So my question would be, how can we use your art, our art, all of us here, how can we use art for peace? How can we help Americans to see the richness of the people and the societies overseas, and not just simply see them as terrorists, not see them as a danger, but rather as a beauty and something which can enrich our whole global society? I have a couple flyers here if anybody would like to take a flyer.
Thank you for your question statement. I didn't get a chance to talk about the Muslim Writers Collective, which I helped co-found in New York City and led the New York City chapter in 2014. And you know, these tropes about Muslims and the stereotypes about Muslims in the American context is either the ISIS sympathizer, or like this very liberal, sort of like irrespective of religion, Muslim. And there's nothing in between. There's like this spectrum that exists. And there's been a lot of think pieces coming out recently about the movie The Big Sick. And that really is a good example on how, you know, moderate Muslims, or what media wants Muslims to be represented as or are seen as. You know, it's like, if we exist and identify as Muslim, we can't do the other things that folks know we do. Pray, fast, celebrate Eid, cover, etc. And so the Muslim Writers Collective exists as a literary platform and an open mic space, which we've been having every month since its inception. And the conversations have ranged from like the most basic thing to like online dating, because that's like a huge thing for us now, and for many other people. And you know, on the other realm, the conversations about Islamophobia, and who's writing about Islamophobia? Are we writing about Islamophobia? And then our personal narratives after a post 9/11 world. Most of us were raised in a post 9/11 world. Most of our lives have been about 9/11, like the traumas of 9/11. And so it's hard, it's a challenge for me to sort of just like kind of simplify the analysis to be like, how do we show more peace? Because we're existing. And even I think it was last week where there was an image of a family, a Bangladeshi Muslim family, visibly Muslim family, because the spouse was wearing a hijab and her partner had a beard, and they were like, there was like a nice gesture with a white family and their baby. And it's like these things, these images have always existed in a place like New York. We've always had positive, peaceful examples of Muslims in our everyday lives. So, you know, it's a real struggle for me to be like, how do we show more peace when there's always been peace and, you know, solidarity and alliance in such big ways. But on the other, I do understand, because that was sort of the premise of creating the Muslim Writers Collective, to ensure that our narratives are being spoken and shared and performed by us. That we're digging deep on the different ethnic diversities of Muslims across the United States and even just within New York City, the different faces, addressing anti-blackness within Muslim communities. You know, how most Muslim spaces are very Arabized and don't include Black Muslims or South Asian Muslims, or include some South Asians and not other South Asians. So there are these conflicts that we're grappling with and having discussions about that are beyond just how are we more peaceful. Even, there was a protest about, like, I don't know, it was like an anti-Muslim protest, I think in Union Square or someplace in New York, and one of their organizers had a heart attack. And a bunch of Muslims sort of grouped together and were like, well, we're gonna raise money for this person's hospitalization and their care. And many of us were just enraged, you know? Like, there's just like, we don't always have to be the moderate Muslim that like comes and pulls together a bunch of money to support a person who is outwardly Islamophobic. We have to address Islamophobia first before we get that funding ready. Or our people need that funding for things that we're creating to make sure that we're surviving the intergenerational traumas of like our homeland, and then migrating, and then now living here in a post-9/11 world where surveillance has always existed, Islamophobia has always existed, the interpersonal, intra-community issues of patriarchy, capitalism have always existed. So this isn't a new world, this isn't even a different world for me, it's just the world I've been living in. I've probably complicated your question a little bit.
Any other responses to that question? Any other questions? Brandon, we have time for one more? Yeah.
I have a response to your question, which I think that it's important that this kind of work is shown in places that are not as diverse as New York City. Right, so to bring it into places where the only images that people have of Muslims is of the terrorist, as opposed to having neighbors that help each other out, right?
That's what we do, yeah.
Yeah, so then you're doing it.
I guess I can say one thing. I think this is an example of one structure, and there's others too, where the conversation around it somehow never is about economics and the fact that it's an engine, and so it's to me incarceration is the same thing. Like, I'm not saying that the other things don't exist, but what's tricky about that question, I think, is that, about the war part of the question specifically, is that, anybody who's studied war in America knows that is an economic engine for America, for certain people in America. And that is the reason why it's happening. And incarceration is the same thing. Just like that was slavery. Race was the conversation around slavery, but it was an economic. It was because people were making money. Otherwise, there was no point for it. So the tricky part of that is that I think there are always going to be the images that dominate that conversation are always going to be larger than the images, than the chances we are given because of the financial realities of it. So that's what makes it tricky, and that's why I think it's a little bit tough to get into the propaganda game. And I think it's better to be more about let us empower the people who have stories to tell that from spaces and people that don't often get a chance to tell those stories. And let us give them the tools to do that, right? so as far as myself, like, the stories that I am going to tell with my art, they have to be very personal. And if there's a certain set of stories that need to be told in that sphere around issues of, you know, that question that you're talking about, I would rather entrust them to people who are much more intimately concerned, you know, understanding that the intimacy and the realities and the complexities of that question than myself. So that's kind of, you know, my focus is on the things that I understand better.
We're gonna wrap up in a second. Vernon and Alice, you had the last word.
Okay, so one of the things that's really kind of funny about speaking about Islam in America is that people don't realize that Muslims have been in America the entire history of the country. Like, Thomas Jefferson had a handwritten Quran. There's a Quran that's been in the White House since the time of Thomas Jefferson. And I believe there were Muslims that fought in the Revolutionary Wars. Muslims have been here the entire time. And part of the problem is, like, the Abrahamic religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, have been having a problem with each other forever. And that's, like, why do most people not know that there's been an Islamic presence in the country from the beginning of the nation? Like, most people don't know that. And that, to me, is a crime. Like, it's very frustrating to me that history as history itself, just as history, has been obfuscated, has been put to the side, and people don't even know. And they think the things that they think in a complete shell of ignorance. That's a real problem. You know, when like, to not know that from the earliest ages that you get lessons in history.
So, in short, and I'm going to say this in a way that perhaps is blunter than I mean it, but I'm still wrestling with it. In short, I don't think it's on us to produce requisite images, to take that on. I think, and here's why. It's that thing of images coming out of New Orleans and Hurricane Katrina. You look at an image of a black man getting water, and you can see one story, right? You can see the story of someone who's been left behind by the system and is trying to survive. Or you see in the media interpreted, you see that some man has probably been out and been looting this stuff. And so it's not, and what you really you're seeing there is a collision of experience and societal narrative. It's not necessarily about the image being produced. So it's on us to tackle the underpinnings, the framing context, that part of it, but not to keep producing these images of peace. Because, as Shahana said, they've been there already. It's about getting to interpretation, interpretive practice, more than it is just constantly trying to prove. Does that make sense? It's really that.
So to get to your, I want to go back to your question about visibility and distribution. I think it's important for you to look at the work not as static, and not that it only exists in a gallery space. I do think using all sorts of new media, from Instagram to creating collaborations with musicians from other communities. You know, we want to make certain that there's not this soundtrack that is predictable, to be quite honest. And I think because ultimately we have to build bridges to other places. And so, you know, I would love to see a classical artist or a hip hop artist narrating a video that you place in a lot of different areas. So I think it's not just about how do we find a gallery or a church, but I think you can open up your consciousness to how you're going to get visibility. And just personally, I believe that we are all first world people. When I hear third world people, it is a language that, you know, comes, reeks of colonialism to me. So I would just be mindful, because then when you say these are third world people, they're making them other than. And if ultimately the goal is about our humanity, it is we are all first world.
We're going to close on that note. Let's have a big round of applause for our panelists, our moderator, SLV, is going to perform again and close us out for the festival. I think you need all of these mics back now, right? So please stay, there's going to be more music. Brandon?
Yeah, I think they just need two now that they're two. But while we're setting up, transitioning, I just wanted to thank again Brian, and as well as all of our wonderful panelists for sharing from their experiences. Just to let you know, we do have the performance, and then we're going to have the bar, as you can see, that's being set up. We're going to have a little transition moment of removing the chairs and putting some cocktail tables out. Our main galleries close at 5, but our panorama of the city of New York, which is right behind me, the model of the city of New York, also has another exhibition around it called the Lavender Line, which is actually in honor of the 25th anniversary of Queen's Pride. And it tells the story of how Queen's Pride actually came out of activism of the LGBT community and their allies in Queens as a result of a hate crime killing of a Latino gay man called Julio Rivera. And out of that tragedy came this celebration. And now I think it has another kind of importance as a kind of parallel event to the kind of very commercialized and mainstream white and gay pride that happens elsewhere. So I think a lot of the Queen's Pride has come to embody a lot of different types of activism over the years in its 25-year history, and we were thankful to our councilman in Jackson Heights, Danny Drum, who was actually one of those activists and who gave his collection of photographs to LaGuardia Community College to help make this exhibit possible. And we also have upstairs an exhibition in our partnership gallery that you can visit by the Set on Freedom artists, and that was a collective of women identified and queer artists who were invited here for a 2-day retreat and then became an artist collective that has a group show up there. And they will also be doing a workshop tomorrow if any of you want to return. So actually, it's part of a day-long conference by Bias4Us, BUFU, which is a Pan-Asian and Black women and queer artist collective. And so they're going to have an all-day thing starting with lunch and having multiple workshops, of which Set on Freedom is going to do a movement workshop and a pop-up apothecary. But it's part of a series that BUFU is doing called Self-Care Sundays. So you're all invited back tomorrow for that if you like, and there's information on our website. But I want to tell you what will be visible after 5. And we're going to stay open, until people want to stay, or 7, whichever is earlier. So with that, let's see. Is there a question about? And I just wanted to also just say that the upstairs, the Community Partnership Gallery, since there might be artists and artist collectives in the room, is an exhibition space that is open to proposals. There's an open call that ends September 15th, and then we choose shows for 3 to 4 weeks the following, for the entire following calendar year. So if any of you are interested in proposing something, it's definitely meant to highlight how artists work in and with communities around social justice issues, around education issues, etc. So it's not just Queens Museum's partners, but also about how artists work in collaboration. So that opportunity is available to all of you as well.
Check. Check. It's only a matter of time before someone tells a story. Don't you think your point of view is the selector of your memory? We can press rewind to let what's left behind. The problem with history is that someone's always started in the middle of the story. The problem with history is that someone's always started in the middle of the story. The problem with history is that someone's always starting in the middle of the story. I'd like to know who wrote the book, because I like to check my sources. Those we've lost don't have a voice. We're stuck with taking your word for it. We can press rewind to collect what's left behind. Problem with history is that someone's always started in the middle of the story. The problem with history is that someone's always started in the middle of the story. The problem with history is that someone's always starting in the middle of the story. We started as a trio, then we expanded and became an duo. I just said we started, when we performed earlier, we were a trio, now we become a duo. Our bass player had another name, because that's when we were busy. Brian, is that cool? Brian? Brian, take it. You want more?
No, yes, please.
One more?
Yeah, please.
What?
You're asking if you do another?
No, I'm asking if that's cool or you want us to. say I've been away so long. I may go wrong and lose my way. Do you know the way to San Jose? I'm going back to find some peace of mind in San Jose. And there is a great big freeway, put 100 down and buy a car. In a week, maybe two, they'll make you a star. Weeks turn into years, how quick they pass. And all the stars that never were are parking cars and pumping gas. You can really breathe in San Jose. They've got a lot of space. There'll be a place where I can stay. I was born and raised in San Jose. I'm going back to find some peace of mind in San Jose. Payment fortune is a magnet. It can pull you far away from home. With a dream in your heart, you're never alone. Dreams turn into dust and go away. And there you are, without a friend. You pack your car and ride away. I've got lots of friends in San Jose. Do you know the way to San Jose? That never were are parking cars and pumping gas. I've got lots of friends in San Jose. Oh, do you know the way to San Jose? Can't wait to get back to San Jose.
Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of Subscript, we would like to thank you for choosing 48 Hours in Transit, compiled by Edmund Stats Houghton and Jamal Ali.
Vous êtes en train de l'expérience de Subscript 48 Hours in Transit, compilé par
You are in the mix with Stats and Bond. This is 48 Hours in Transit, sponsored by Subscript. Music on the experience to Subscript 48 Hours in Transit, compilé par Edmund Stats Houghton and Jamal Ali.
Give it what you got, give it what you got, give it what you got. If you on the block, give it what you got.
Long party. I don't know, like where the